When the Second World War erupted in 1939, the United States was watching from across the ocean. Europe was burning. German tanks, the famous Panzers, were rolling through countries faster than anyone thought possible. Poland fell in weeks, France in a month, and even the British Army barely escaped across the Channel at Dunkirk. The message was clear to every military leader in the world. Whoever controlled the tanks controlled the battlefield. America, however, didn't have the tanks it needed. Its armoured forces were small, its machines outdated. The main American tanks, the M2 and M3, were awkward, tall, and poorly armed. They might have been fine in the 1930s, but against the Germans' modern armour, they would never survive. The US Army knew that if war came, its soldiers would need something far better. So, in 1940 and 1941, American engineers and generals began designing a new machine, a tank that could not only fight, but also be built in huge numbers. They needed something reliable, simple to repair, and strong enough to stand on any battlefield in the world. Out of that urgency came a project that would change history, the M4 Sherman. The name Sherman came later, after the Civil War General William Tecumseh Sherman. It was a fitting name for a tank that would eventually march through Europe, just as its namesake had marched through the American South. But before it earned that name, it was just an idea, a set of drawings and blueprints passed between officers inside the US Army Ordnance Department. These men faced a difficult task. They needed to design something powerful, but still light enough to transport across oceans. It had to use existing American engines and weapons, because there was no time to invent new ones from scratch. Above all, it had to be easy for ordinary soldiers to maintain, because a tank that broke down in battle was as useless as none at all. By 1941, the design was ready. The first prototypes were tested at Aberdeen Proving Ground, and the results were promising. The new tank was lower, wider, and better balanced than its predecessors. It used a 75mm gun that could destroy enemy armour and support infantry at the same time. The tracks were wide enough to handle mud, sand, and snow. Every bolt, hinge, and hatch was designed for one thing: dependability. When America entered the war after Pearl Harbor, the M4 was already in production. But the real miracle wasn't the tank itself, it was how it was built. Instead of a single company, dozens of factories across the United States joined forces to produce it. Chrysler ran the huge Detroit Arsenal tank plant, the first factory in the world built specifically for tank production. Ford built engines and components. General Motors' Fisher Body division made hulls and turrets. Baldwin Locomotive Works, the Press Steel Car Company, and the American Locomotive Company all took part. This cooperation was something no other nation could match. The Soviet Union had numbers. Germany had engineering. But America had industry. An industry that could build not hundreds, but tens of thousands of tanks. The M4 was designed so that a part made in one factory would fit perfectly into a tank made in another. Mechanics at the front could replace an engine or a transmission using whatever spare parts were available, and the vehicle would still run. Inside the tank, 5 men formed a small team that lived, fought, and sometimes died together. The commander directed the crew, calling out targets through the intercom. The gunner aimed and fired the main gun. The loader handled heavy shells, sliding them into the breach again and again. The driver and assistant driver sat in the front, steering the 30-ton machine through mud and rubble. Space was tight, noise constant, and the air thick with the smell of fuel and sweat. Yet crews trusted their Sherman. It started when they needed it to. It moved when they told it to. It kept them alive long enough to finish the fight. The Sherman's first real test came in North Africa in 1942. The British Army, already fighting Rommel's Afrika Korps, received early batches through America's Lend-Lease program. On the desert sands, the new tank proved itself. It was faster than most German models and much more reliable. While German panzers often broke down under the harsh desert heat, the Sherman kept going. Its 75mm gun could knock out any Panzer III or IV it met, and its mobility allowed Allied forces to outflank stronger enemies. The victories at El Alamein and later in Tunisia showed the world that the Allies finally had a tank capable of taking the fight to the Axis. It wasn't invincible, but it was good enough, and it could be produced faster than the Germans could replace theirs. Back in the United States, production lines ran day and night. Workers who had never seen a battlefield, men and women alike, assembled hulls, installed engines, welded armor plates, and painted the olive-drab finish that would become iconic. Every day, dozens of new Shermans rolled off the lines and were shipped to distant fronts: Africa, Italy, the Pacific, and eventually France. The secret to the Sherman's success wasn't just the tank itself, it was the system behind it, the coordination of industry, logistics, and training. American soldiers could be trained quickly because every Sherman was familiar. A crew could move from one tank to another without relearning controls or layout. Spare parts arrived by the ton, and mechanics knew exactly how to repair what broke. German commanders often admitted that the Allies' real advantage wasn't in technology, it was in reliability and numbers. A Tiger tank might defeat a Sherman one-on-one, but the Germans could never field enough Tigers to stop the endless wave of Shermans that kept coming. The M4 became more than just a vehicle. It became the symbol of America's growing power. To the soldiers who fought inside it, it represented survival and strength. To the civilians who built it, it was proof that their hard work at home mattered. And to the enemies who saw it crest a hill, it meant one thing: the Americans were here. By the end of 1943, the Sherman was serving in every major Allied army. The British and Canadians used it across North Africa and Italy. The Soviets received thousands under Lend-Lease and praised its dependability. In the Pacific, US Marines modified Shermans for island assaults, equipping some with flamethrowers to clear Japanese bunkers. It was not a perfect tank. Its armor could be penetrated by heavy German guns, and early versions could catch fire when hit. Crews joked grimly that it lit up like a Ronson lighter, but improvements came quickly: better armor, wet ammunition storage, and the more powerful 76mm gun. The British even fitted their own 17-pounder gun to create the famous Sherman Firefly, capable of destroying a Tiger at long range. What made the Sherman great was not invincibility, but evolution. It could adapt. Engineers modified it for every role imaginable: recovery vehicle, bridge layer, mine clearer, even amphibious tank. It became the foundation of an entire family of machines. By the time Allied troops landed in Normandy in June 1944, the Sherman was ready. Thousands rolled ashore to support the infantry. They fought through hedgerows, villages, and open fields, facing the best Germany could offer. Losses were heavy, but the Allies kept advancing because the supply of tanks never stopped. At home, newspapers showed photos of endless rows of Shermans waiting to be shipped overseas. They became a symbol of unstoppable momentum, proof that America could outproduce, out-repair, and out-fight its enemies. When the war finally ended in 1945, the Sherman had been built in staggering numbers, nearly 50,000 in all. It had served in every climate, on every front, with every major Allied army. It was not the most powerful tank of the war, but it was the most important one. It was the tank that made victory possible. Even after the guns fell silent, the Sherman's story wasn't over. It continued to serve in Korea, in the Middle East, and in smaller wars around the world for decades. Its simple design allowed nations to upgrade and modify it long after newer tanks replaced it in US service. The Sherman had become a legend, not because it was perfect, but because it was reliable, adaptable, and built by the collective effort of millions of ordinary people. It was the result of America's unity, determination, and industrial genius. The iron beast that helped win the war had earned its place in history. When the M4 Sherman rolled off the assembly lines and into war, it was more than a weapon. It was a statement. America had entered the conflict with its full industrial power, and the Sherman became the steel embodiment of that promise. In North Africa, it had proven itself against the Afrika Korps, but the war was far from over. The next test would come in Europe, where the world's largest armoured battles were yet to unfold. By late 1943, Allied commanders had learned valuable lessons from the desert campaigns. The Sherman's reliability was beyond question, but its 75mm gun was starting to show its limits. German tanks were getting tougher. The new Panzer IVs had thicker armour, and the formidable Tiger I had appeared on the battlefield, a tank so powerful that its presence could turn an entire battle. Allied troops needed to adapt fast. American engineers responded by fitting the Sherman with a longer-barreled 76mm gun capable of firing armour-piercing rounds with higher velocity. Armour protection was improved, ammunition storage redesigned to reduce the risk of fires, and the suspension upgraded for better handling. Out of these improvements came new versions, the M4A3, the M4A1, and eventually the M4A3E8, nicknamed the Easy 8. Each new version built on what the crews learned in battle. While these upgrades were being tested, the Shermans kept fighting in Italy. The mountainous terrain, narrow roads, and fortified towns made tank warfare brutal. Shermans clawed their way through mud and rubble, blasting pillboxes and bunkers in support of infantry. They were not glamorous battles, but they were essential ones. Every mile northward was a step closer to the heart of Axis Europe. Then came the turning point, the Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944. On D-Day, as the beaches erupted under German fire, Shermans rumbled off landing craft onto French soil. Some were specially modified DD versions, fitted with collapsible canvas skirts and propellers so they could swim from ship to shore. Many sank in the rough surf before they reached land, but those that made it gave the infantry the armoured support they desperately needed. Once inland, the Shermans faced a new nightmare. The bocage, a maze of dense hedgerows that crisscrossed Normandy. The thick earth embankments made it impossible to see or shoot ahead, and German anti-tank guns hid behind every corner. The first days were disastrous. Tanks were trapped, ambushed, and destroyed before they could even fire a shot. But again, American improvisation turned the tide. A sergeant named Curtis Cullen welded pieces of steel from German roadblocks to the front of his Sherman, creating sharp prongs that could slice through hedgerows. The Cullen cutter spread through the army within weeks. With it, Shermans could break through barriers and keep moving. That single field invention transformed the battle for Normandy. As the Allies pushed deeper into France, the Sherman became the backbone of their advance. Tank battalions fought alongside infantry divisions, while armoured divisions used mass formations of Shermans to punch through German lines. The secret of the Sherman's success wasn't that it was better than every enemy tank. It was that it worked as part of a system. Each Sherman was supported by artillery, aircraft, and mobile repair crews. If a tank was knocked out, another could be towed in, repaired overnight, and back in action by morning. Fuel, ammunition, and spare parts arrived in endless convoys from the beaches. German units, on the other hand, often ran out of fuel or spare tracks before they ran out of courage. In August 1944, during the Falaise Pocket, the Sherman's mobility played a decisive role. Allied armour trapped tens of thousands of German troops trying to retreat east. The Sherman formations blocked the exits, cutting off escape routes and sealing one of the most critical victories in the Western campaign. From that moment, the German army was on the run. Yet the fighting was far from easy. When the Allies entered Belgium and the Netherlands, they met the fearsome Panther, Germany's most balanced tank, fast, heavily armoured, and equipped with a devastating 75mm high-velocity gun. The Panther could destroy a Sherman at long range before the Americans even spotted it. To counter this, Shermans relied on teamwork. Tank platoons manoeuvred together, flanking the heavier German tanks and calling in airstrikes when needed. The British, facing the same challenge, introduced the Sherman Firefly. They replaced the American 75mm gun with their powerful 17-pounder, a weapon capable of piercing even the Tiger's thick frontal armour. Fireflies became prized assets, often hidden among regular Shermans to surprise enemy tanks. German crews learned to fear them. Whenever they spotted a long-barreled Firefly, they aimed for it first. The months that followed were some of the hardest of the war. In December 1944, the Germans launched a massive counterattack in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. Under snow and fog, American units were caught off guard. Entire towns changed hands multiple times. But once again, the Sherman proved its worth. Its engines started in freezing temperatures when many German tanks failed to move. Its mechanical reliability kept the US counterattack alive. By January 1945, the Bulge had been pushed back and the German army was bleeding out. By spring, Allied Shermans were crossing the Rhine River into Germany itself. Town after town fell, and the once mighty Wehrmacht retreated toward Berlin. In the east, Soviet troops, many in Sherman tanks supplied through the Lend-Lease program, closed in from the other side. The machine that America had built by the thousands had become a global instrument of liberation. Inside each Sherman, crews had their own stories. Some named their tanks after hometowns, sweethearts, or movie stars. They painted nicknames like Battling Bitch, In the Mood, or Cobra King on the turrets. These weren't just markings. They were personal connections in an inhuman war. Every crew knew that their survival depended on trust, quick decisions, and luck. A tank hit by a German shell was a terrifying place. Flames could spread instantly, and crewmen had only seconds to escape. Many did not. But those who lived carried a deep respect for their machine. They knew its limits, yet they also knew its heart. The Sherman would get them home more often than not. When victory finally came in May 1945, the M4 Sherman stood as one of the unsung heroes of the Allied triumph. It had fought on every continent, in every climate, and under every flag of the free world. It wasn't the heaviest, the fastest, or the most powerful, but it was the tank that never gave up. It won because America could build it faster than the enemy could destroy it. It won because its crews trusted it. It won because it was simple enough to repair in a barn and strong enough to roll through hell. The Sherman's journey through Europe had proven a truth about war. Victory doesn't always belong to the most advanced weapon, but to the one that's there when it's needed. Even after Germany's surrender, the Sherman story continued in the Pacific. Thousands were shipped across the ocean to support US Marines in the island campaigns. On Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Shermans fought through volcanic rock and jungle, facing Japanese defenders who refused to surrender. Many Shermans were modified with flamethrowers to burn out entrenched caves. In those brutal battles, the tank's armor saved countless lives. When Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, the Sherman had served from Normandy's hedgerows to the beaches of the Pacific. It had helped crush fascism on 2 continents and secure peace for a generation. For the men who fought in them, the Sherman was more than steel. It was a friend, a shield, and a home in a world gone mad. For America, it was proof that ordinary people, factory workers, engineers, and soldiers could together build something extraordinary. And as peace returned, the Sherman rolled home. Some were scrapped, others sent to allies, and a few were parked in town squares as monuments to courage and sacrifice. But for those who had ridden inside, the rumble of its engine would never fade. The iron beast had done its duty. When people speak of the M4 Sherman, they often imagine the roar of engines, the clash of armour, the fire and smoke of battle. But the Sherman's true power didn't begin on the battlefield. It began in the factories of America. While German engineers worked in secrecy, designing perfection on blueprints, the United States built an army of machines at an industrial scale the world had never seen. The Sherman wasn't just a tank. It was the product of an entire nation mobilized for total war. In 1940, when the US Army had fewer than 500 modern tanks, no one could have imagined what was coming. But by 1945, America had produced nearly 50,000 Sherman tanks. That number alone tells a story, not of superiority in design, but of absolute dominance in production, logistics, and adaptability. Factories that once built cars and farm equipment were transformed into armor plants. The Ford Motor Company, Chrysler, General Motors, and smaller manufacturers like American Locomotive and Baldwin all joined forces. The Detroit Arsenal tank plant, built by Chrysler, became the beating heart of Sherman production. A place where steel flowed like blood through the veins of a giant war machine. Each tank rolled off the line with precision and speed. Assembly lines that once crafted automobiles now produced tanks in weeks instead of months. At the height of the war, a new Sherman could be completed every 30 minutes. The scale was staggering, but mass production was only part of the story. Engineers understood that a tank must be more than a machine. It had to be reliable, easy to repair, and adaptable to any front. The Sherman was all of those things. Its parts were standardized, meaning a component built in one factory would fit perfectly into a tank from another. Mechanics could replace damaged tracks or engines in the field, using only basic tools. German tanks like the Tiger or Panther might have been masterpieces of engineering, but they were nightmares to maintain. Their transmissions were complex, their engines fragile, and spare parts were scarce. A broken-down Tiger could be left behind. A broken Sherman could be fixed overnight and sent back to fight. That difference, reliability, saved lives and won battles. Even the logistics of getting Shermans to the front was a victory of organization. Each tank had to be shipped across the Atlantic, loaded onto landing craft, and driven straight into combat zones. Thousands of mechanics, dock workers, and sailors played their roles unseen, ensuring that when soldiers needed armor, it was there. Back home, the people who built these machines became silent heroes. Women took over factory floors as men went to war. They worked long shifts, welding steel plates and assembling engines. For many, it was their first time in heavy industry, yet their skill and dedication turned the Sherman from a blueprint into a symbol of hope. There was pride in every rivet, every weld. Many workers painted small messages on the tanks before they left the factory. Words like, "Give 'em hell, boys," or "Come home safe." Those personal touches traveled across oceans into the heart of Europe and the Pacific. While America produced in numbers, the Sherman also evolved constantly. Each variant brought new improvements. The M4A1, with its rounded cast hull, was the first major production model. The M4A2 and M4A3 followed, with diesel and gasoline engines respectively. Later versions introduced better armor, wider tracks for rough terrain, and new suspension systems. The M4A3E8 Easy 8, introduced in 1944, featured a high-velocity 76mm gun, horizontal suspension, and superior handling. It became one of the best tanks of the entire war. But what truly made the Sherman legendary was its versatility. It could be turned into almost anything. Engineers converted it into a flamethrower tank for island assaults, a bridge layer, a mine-clearing vehicle, even a recovery tank that towed others out of battle. The British adapted it into the Firefly, mounting their deadly 17-pounder gun. The Canadians created the Grizzly, the Soviets received thousands through Lend-Lease, and the Israelis would later upgrade Shermans into the 1960s, calling them Super Shermans. Few machines in history have had such a long and global life. But during the war, not everyone loved the Sherman. Some soldiers nicknamed it the Ronson, after the cigarette lighter, saying it lights up the first time, every time. The early models were prone to catching fire when hit, due to ammunition storage in the hull. It was a frightening flaw. To fix it, American engineers introduced wet stowage, a water glycol mixture that surrounded the shells, preventing ignition. The improvement drastically reduced fires and saved countless lives. The Sherman evolved not in labs, but through experience, through trial, error, and sacrifice. In battle, the Sherman wasn't designed to take on the heaviest German tanks one-on-one. Its strength came from numbers, coordination, and mobility. When a Tiger appeared, the Shermans flanked it, calling in artillery or airstrikes. They worked as a team, not as lone wolves. That tactical approach mirrored America's overall war strategy: overwhelming force and cooperation. By 1945, as Allied forces swept through Germany, the roads were lined with the wreckage of German armor. Tigers and Panthers lay abandoned, out of fuel, broken, or destroyed. The Shermans, however, kept rolling. They weren't perfect, but they were there, and they didn't stop. The legacy of the M4 Sherman didn't end with victory in Europe. After the war, the US found itself with tens of thousands of these tanks, and they became the foundation for armies across the world. France, Italy, Britain, China, and dozens of other nations received Shermans. When new conflicts erupted, in Korea, the Middle East, and even Indochina, the Sherman returned to battle. In the Korean War, Shermans faced off against Soviet-built T-34s in brutal tank duels across icy hills and muddy plains. Even after years of service, the old M4s proved they could still fight. In Israel's wars of the 1950s and 1960s, heavily modified Shermans stood their ground against newer tanks, proving that good design, when adaptable, can outlive generations. By the 1970s, the Sherman's active combat life was finally coming to an end, but its legend was immortal. Museums, monuments, and veterans' parades across the world honored its service. For the men who built it, the Sherman represented what America could achieve when united. For the men who fought in it, it represented survival, resilience, and brotherhood. Today, when a Sherman starts its engine at a military show or memorial event, the rumble still echoes with history, a reminder of a time when steel, sweat, and courage changed the world. It wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but it was the right tank, at the right time, built by the right people. The M4 Sherman was not just a tank, it was a triumph of will, a monument of industry, and the iron heart of victory.